You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, as we come close to closing out 2023, we thought that we would have a very interesting BioTalk podcast for you and do something that we normally don't do. And that's have multiple guests on simultaneously. So we're going to have 3 guests representing the same company. And we're going to see how much they trip over each other and how well they do handoffs with one another, since we haven't done much of this. But I know all of the people and I know they're all professionals. So this is going to come off as an excellent podcast. And whom we have today, we basically have the company Solaxa, Inc., and the founder, Christian Walker, who's the founder and CEO. Accompanying Christian will be Luis Gutierrez, who is the chief operating officer, but we know Luis also as an executive in residence and an entrepreneur in residence with the NIH and Montgomery County. And we also have Jen Butler, who is the chief commercial officer, but also an executive in residence in Montgomery County. So we know Luis and Jen very well. And we also know Christian because he participated in our crab trap competition and won the Montgomery County Crab Trap Award. So we have a lot of people that know each other very well. So I'm sure this is going to go very smoothly. So let's start. As you know, when we do these podcasts, the listeners like to know the backgrounds of the people that we have on the podcast. So we're going to start with Christian, who's the founder and CEO of Solaxa. Christian, if you don't mind, let's give the listeners a little bit about your background.
Great. Well, first, Rich, thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation to talk to you about Solaxa. From a background perspective, I've been working in nerve injury and nerve damage for the last 20 years. I started this process off when I was at the University of Texas at Austin doing graduate work in a lab that the technology would become Axygen, and that company makes products to help surgeons repair nerves. Moving through the next phase, I spent time in both startups and venture capital and ended up at Walter Reed to help injured service members regain nerve function, and look forward to sharing more about Solaxa and our role. So I'll turn it over to Jen and Luis.
Great. Thank you for that intro. And Luis, a little bit about your background.
Certainly. So as Rich noted at the top end, I serve in a number of roles where I see and coach biohealth startups on a nationwide basis, even though I'm based here in the BioHealth Capital Region. One such person I got to meet was Christian. I started over a year ago now, working with him as an external advisor, as a coach. I got to know the story more and more, got to like it more and more, advanced from advisor to investor, from investor to board member. The incremental commitment at this point is fractional COO. And I'm loving every bit of the ride, and we can't wait to tell you more about it.
That's great. But before you rush away from your background, though, you mentioned you've been working with him for a year, and that's really through a pilot program that was created, which is very innovative, with Montgomery County and very unusual. Would you like to just introduce that program very briefly before we go to Jen?
Certainly. So as Jen and I joined you for an earlier podcast, Montgomery County, Maryland provides resources to coach biohealth startups here in the region. And Christian was one of the very first, or Solaxa was one of the very first companies into the program and was the first to graduate from the program and is advanced, and to your point, is now presenting and winning prizes. That program is still very much available to any Montgomery County-based startups who are listening today, who are looking for commercial or clinical development advice. We do have a third colleague who's more clinically oriented, and as well as 20-some EIRs at BHI who can bring a wealth of product development experience to startup companies.
Great. Thank you for that background, Luis. Now, Jen Butler.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having all of us. So my background really started off early working with early publicly traded companies. So early in my career, I was working at Merrill Lynch and Capital Markets and Thompson Financial. And so I would say I saw early public capital companies at that point, and then moved in-house inside the industry to a local company. Actually, 2 local companies, started with Emergent Biosolutions for a short stint and then moved to MedImmune. MedImmune providing just a really great career there, 10 plus years. Was there pre-acquisition, was there during the AstraZeneca days. And at that time, had a variety of roles in corporate strategy, commercial strategy, and really was happy for the opportunity to work for a global pharmaceutical company. I like to say I was classically trained in large pharma. And then 5-6 years ago, decided to go back to working with smaller companies, a bit more of a return to my earlier career, and really went to work for much earlier stage private companies, helping some do soft landings here in the United States, some helping set up an inaugural commercial organization. And so, as mentioned previously, was connected through BHI to be an executive in residence with Montgomery County. Thought this was such a great opportunity to invest in the local ecosystem and have an opportunity to apply my experience to these companies. And Solaxa was a very good fit for me because it is a startup, though, that has an opportunity that may find a very early commercial launch, leveraging a unique regulatory pathway with the 505(b)(2), leveraging market protection through the orphan drug, which we'll get into some more detail.
Thank you, Jen. So Christian, Lewis, and Jen, we're going to talk a little bit more about the team later, but it's really exciting to see people come together within the BioHealth Capital Region that can benefit one another without having to go miles to either coast or north to find the resources because we have them in our backyard. So, but I think right now, the most important thing is we've been talking about Solaxa and Christian as the founder, but we really don't know much about the technology or the science, Christian. So please give us an introduction on Solaxa.
So Solaxa, we're dedicated to restoring nerve function. Nerves have signals that fire, and those signals allow the communication between different parts of the body and really affect everything that we do. And when nerve function is disrupted, it can have dramatic impact on people's lives. People can lose the ability to move, feel, and do almost everything. Everything is controlled by nerves, and nerve injuries are destructive to people's quality of life. I arrived in Montgomery County about 12 years ago and did a number of time in venture capital and got to see a number of startups. And what I learned looking at these regenerative medicine approaches that were very popular at the time was that if you rebuilt something, if you couldn't feel it or you couldn't move it, it really didn't mean you didn't have a solution that was meaningful. This led me to become the director at the Peripheral Nerve Institute at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where we treated injured servicewomen and servicemen from all different branches. We discovered a new use for an old drug, what Jen referred to as 505(b)(2) repurposing. And what we do is take a drug that's already been through the FDA, and so we can skip over phase 1 and phase 2 trials because we can reference the data that already existed. And in this scenario at Walter Reed, we were using this drug that was approved for multiple sclerosis and found out that it could help people with nerve injuries. Since that time where we started about 2 years ago, we've discovered that this drug has even more promise in a new form of what's called spinocerebellar ataxia. And it's a genetically inherited condition. And what it does is affects the cerebellum, which is the bottom part of your brain. And in these people who inherit this genetic mutation, they have an atrophy in that part of their brain that causes them to look like they're drunk while walking. And they have problems with gait and balance. They have problems with speech. They slur their speech. And in this population, this drug, 4-aminopyridine, works amazingly well in taking one pill in less than an hour. It can have a dramatic effect on letting people live their lives without having these symptoms. And we're focused on this group. It's a rare population, meaning that it's under 200,000 people. And because we're developing this drug and repurposing it for that group, we'll get 7 years of regulatory exclusivity. And that really helps make a convincing argument to investors that we can protect this field. And what we've done is designed our drug to meet the needs of this group. And in a repurposing play, the most important thing is, how are we different than the drug that already came before us? And that drug was designed for multiple sclerosis. It took weeks to build up in your system. And we've designed a new version of this drug that is fast acting, can be given to at lower doses, even potentially to children who have currently been excluded from taking this drug. And we're really excited about the fact that we've found a new population that this can work on. And we're still going to go down after a lot of the type of acute nerve injuries that we were studying at Walter Reed. And those include traumatic injuries, surgical injuries. So we have a deep pipeline, but our initial target and focus is on these people with spinocerebellar ataxia, and look forward to discussing more as we progress through this.
Sure. We're going to talk a little bit more about science and the regulatory environment as we get further into the podcast. But one of the most interesting things is you said you landed in Montgomery County 12 years ago, but you probably, with your vast experience, have had many places around the United States that you could have located Solaxa. And why is it that you chose Montgomery County and the BioHealth Capital Region as the location for building this business?
I'll go back to the strengths of this area come down to the amazing scientific resources that are available at the NIH. And I would, regardless if you support the current conflicts that we find ourselves in, I feel that we always have to support the service members who are in those conflicts. And right across the street, many people don't know, from the National Institutes of Health is Walter Reed, the premier military institute, which has military medicine relevance. There's actually a military medical school, which I think a lot of people don't realize that we have a medical school in Montgomery County. And even in the state of Maryland, the access and the resources that military medicine plays, from Fort Detrick up in Frederick, they're one of the largest funders of military medicine. And there's a lot of translation between military medicine and other applications. So I'll say it's the NIH, the military, and Bethesda is just a great place to live and to work. And it has an ecosystem that we've made introductions to.
I'm sure that the chamber would love just what you said, Christian. But Lewis, I think, has some things to add to that.
Yeah, in terms of the ecosystem part, we've been able to find intellectual property attorneys locally who get what we do, get our pathway, corporate attorneys, accountants. So there's a support infrastructure in this area that's local. Some of the core IP that Christian has brought into the company is licensed actually comes from the University of Rochester and from Penn State. But we chose to set up the company here to leverage some of the local resources, and we're happy to be here.
And also, he found Louis Gutierrez and Jen Butler in this region, too, which is a major plus for Solaxa. So we're talking about the team a little bit, but maybe, Louis, you might talk a little bit about how this whole Solaxa team has come together with all of the different disparate backgrounds that everybody has. And when you identify as a CEO like Christian does, he has significant strength in certain areas, but has to complement himself with other people who have unique skills that would be beneficial to the company and to him. So talk a little bit about how the team came together.
Absolutely. So there's three flavors, as it were, starting with the local angle, Jen, myself, the support that MoCo provided to get the team started, and then the network effect. Some of the other people we've brought in are folks that each of the three of us, and by being local, guess what? A lot of the folks we know are local, and that's been one major component. The other two components, which are maybe less local and more global, are finding members of the team who understand this disease inside and out. Our head of translational science and quantitative analytics, he's in Switzerland, but he's done every clinical study that's ever been done in this disease and disease like it. Our board chair held C-level roles at the originator company. So she knows this molecule and its markets and all the research that's been done on that inside and out. Ditto with our scientific advisor, et cetera. So there's a prior experience bucket. And then the third bucket is the follow-on of folks we know in the network effect that we've been able to augment our finance function and other functions just based on, well, we're in, let's bring in folks we know. And it is actually a large team for a startup, albeit most folks still fractional, and it has that flexibility. So it's not a crazy burn rate, but at the same time, we've got skill sets that help us punch above our weight at the moment.
Yeah, I think another component of building a team really relates to a lot of scientific advisory boards or key opinion leaders that you associate with your company. So what has Solaxa done, and what stage are they in the development of those areas?
We do have a big group of scientific advisors, of neurologists. One of them is up at Hopkins. Others are distributed throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. We've already assembled our clinical trial network. Now, we've got some FDA steps to get through before we're ready to pull the trigger on that. But that advisory function is really guiding the whole clinical development plan of this molecule.
Well, based on where you are today, Christian, I'm sure you have some very important milestones and goals of the company that are short and long term. So let's walk through some of the major scientific and regulatory goals that you have established for Solaxa.
Solaxa is at a seed stage. We've been in operation for 2 years, and we've really put the team together, our intellectual property together. For a seed stage company to say that we're clinical ready is very unique. We have a very short path to market. We'll take about 24 to 30 months before we'll be able to submit our first application to the FDA for approval. And we need to do a single pivotal study. And so we're looking at starting with the 505B process allows us to avoid phase 1 studies, allows us to avoid phase 2 studies. And based upon how well this drug has worked in this group of SCA27B patients, we're looking at starting our clinical trial for approval in about 1 year. And so we're not starting with animal models, we're starting with human data. We know that this drug works in this population. And SCA27B, which is the spinocerebellar ataxia type 27B, there's about 8,000 patients with that. We've now been able to identify 300 or 400 patients that could enroll in our trial. So we know where those patients are. And our focus is really on bringing together the regulatory team, the clinical team, and putting the financing together so that we can move extremely rapidly from being a seed stage company to a commercial company. And so those are the scientific and regulatory milestones. And we think we can do that after raising a single Series A financing.
And basically, when you say a single Series A financing, I think we're going to turn to Lewis, maybe to talk a little bit about the funding history. How has Solaxa evolved to where it is today? What financial resources have been needed? And what are you going to need for the future and the strategy to achieve that funding that's necessary to take you through that scientific and regulatory path?
Certainly. So the proof of concept work that occurred largely in academic labs, our scientific founders have raised on the order of $8 million in non-dilutive funding that really helped us understand better how this molecule works, what its range of uses are, et cetera. And we're focusing primarily on our first use case, but there's a lot of research that's been done in some of the downstream use cases as well. And non-dilutive funding is what has helped that happen and continues to make it happen. We have other human clinical work that is actually academically funded starting up even next year. But in terms of the company itself, we're about a third closed of our seed round with real, I'm not sure it's even penciled in, it's more like circled in pen for the next third. I'd love to, with certain local angel groups have been very helpful, as well as some individual angels.
I mean, we would call those hard circles, not soft circles. They can't be erased because it's in pen versus pencil.
That's right. And will be presented to TEDCO's investment committee on January 10th, I understand. So we're comfortable about that. Before we actually start the clinical trials, though, we're going to be seeking feedback from FDA with a preclinical meeting request, of course, and that'll guide the IND we put in. We will be submitting our orphan drug designation. And in the meantime, the three of us are traveling out to San Francisco in January to attend the Bio 101 partnering, tech showcase, the various more startup-oriented meetings around JP Morgan. We've got a roster of meetings ready to go, and the activity has really kicked up the last week or two in terms of getting actual time slots. I'd love to call out the Maryland Tech Council. We're using some meeting space that they have made available to us, as well as some other meeting space we have. Meeting with VCs for what we think will be about a $22 million Series A. But we won't be close at this point. It's sort of first meeting, get people to know. The close on that won't be till probably next summer-ish, give or take. And also looking at potential commercial partnerships. When a virtual company like us with a speed to market like ours, the question then becomes, and this is really getting into Jen's world, of what's the commercial strategy? Do we build our own, or do we make our first product something that we drop in somebody else's bag, let them sell it, we take that revenue, and we chase our downstream markets, which are not orphans. They're much bigger revenue potential products. But in the meantime, we are establishing a lot of relationships especially in the rare space, it's crucial to really tee up relationships with the disease and patient-oriented groups. That's probably a good segue to let Jen tell us how advanced we've gotten there.
I think the big difference for Solaxa versus other typical early stage startups is that you'll be starting at a preclinical stage. And so therefore, with needing to do all the de novo animal studies, do the proper phase 1, phase 2 dose ranging, phase 3. And so for many, many companies in a preclinical stage, you are looking at, particularly for venture capitalists, potentially a time horizon of 7 to 10 years. So the unique thing for Solaxa, which also makes it an obligation for us to find the right investors, is that with the repurposing play, you're looking at a much shorter time frame. So where you've discharged this clinical risk that Christian's talking about and you discharge regulatory risk, you have to say, well, now what is a commercial opportunity with a repurposing play? So this is why someone with my background, with a more commercial background, would come into an organization kind of at this time period, because you're looking at a potential product in the market within 3 to 4 years of a company's, call it inception. So that's the one thing with Solaxa. But what I think is also very attractive is that additional indications that come on later as it relates to this acute work that Christian talked about as the origin story. Where could this have utility for injured servicemen and women? Where could there be utility for this in other type of acute injuries? And so I think that it's this really nice blend of having this kind of short-term opportunity, which still be financially lucrative, but it'll be lower top-line revenue opportunity than you would see potentially in 8 to 10-year R&D timelines, but that you have a pipeline kind of sitting in behind it. And so we think that we could comfortably build what we would call a rare U.S. oncology business, potentially with some additional countries like Canada. And then we would talk to Lewis, said we may think about how we would commercialize this in other countries. But we would also be very open to conversations with folks who want to potentially add to their pipeline, particularly in rare and particularly in ataxia. I think for anyone who follows the news, they'll see that Biogen's acquisition of Reata definitely got folks' attention as it relates to the commercial value and the market value as it relates to investing in rare diseases, in particular in ataxias. So we believe that there should be some market momentum when we're talking to folks about the opportunities in those particular rare diseases.
One of the things I want to go back on a little bit, though, and for whomever would like to answer it, we keep talking about repurposing. There are opportunities with repurposing as well as challenges versus a brand new drug, which you're trying to come to market with for the first time that has not already had some background within the industry. So talk a little bit about where you are with repurposing is compared to those startup companies who are starting from scratch without any science or technology that has already been in the marketplace that is being repurposed. And Jen, do you want to take that, or Christian?
I'll start, and then Christian, you can build on it. I think that the first thing to do is really understand that repurposing can mean many things to many folks. So recently I was at the NORD conference presenting on behalf of Solaxa, and you see that there are folks who are using AI as an example to go out and actually mine targets and things like this and begin to make these matches as it relates to other potential compounds that could fit within that specific disease. Then you also have what I'll call reformulation repurposing plays, in which they may take an old compound and do that. Then there also are where they're re-envisioning, again, this idea of finding new indications, similar to us, in which there has been some early investigator-initiated trials in which this drug has been trialed. But also we want to do a new clinical phase 3 program to validate the utility of the drug in that. And then we also want to look at new doses, these kind of bespoke match a drug that's in the market and just try to use it in that way, but actually re-envision taking that active ingredient and really finding a match for the needs of that patient population. And so when we talk about SCOT27B, this idea of having a drug that can have this immediate onset. So that's really for our repurposing. It's about bringing a new dosage, a new formulation, and a new patient population is how we're repurposing. We do believe it's still going to provide an innovation to these patients and really provide addressing the efficacy while offsetting the safety in this patient population. The 505B2, every drug has its own unique journey to the 505B2, and this is our particular journey with the Solaxa compound.
Christian, anything you want to add about this journey?
This drug has helped people with multiple sclerosis walk faster. In doing so, the drug was first introduced in 2010 but you had to take the drug for 2 to 3 weeks in this extended release formula. And 4-aminopyridine, our drug, has never been released in a formula that allows for a quick onset. And so people with cerebellar ataxias have problems sleeping. They can't take a drug at night that you have to take twice a day, as you do with the drug that's specifically designed for multiple sclerosis. So what we've done is tried to get as close to the market, to the population of people who are using this drug. And so one of the first early things we did was go out to the National Ataxia Foundation conference and meet people who have an ataxia. They're very different than some of the people with acute nerve injuries, and learning about what their journey was in terms of how they got ataxia, what their experience is, really helped to inform our approach in making a novel formulation and novel dosages, as Jen was describing. We've also been lucky to have a person who has SCA27B, Bill Nye, the science guy, who many people know comes from a SCA27B family. And so there's starting to be some awareness of this new condition, because SCA27B was only first discovered and reported on in January of 2023. And so this is a very new discovery. And so to go from the discovery of the genetic condition to having significant amounts of human data using our drug in such a short period of time has really been unique in our approach. And I'll turn it over to Lewis.
I was processing on another perspective on the drug repurposing angle, which is the speed to market. So we're a startup company, but as Christian noted, we're starting clinical trials and we could be on the market as early as 26, within a protected lifespan of 7 years, which, sure, we don't have composition of matter IP, but when you have composition of matter IP, you file for it before you've dosed your first rat. And a bunch of it gets burned in the preclinical and clinical development process. And then you come to market, and depending on how quickly you did it, you've got anywhere from 9 to 12 years left. We've got 7, but our cost and our time of getting to market are so much less that from a return on investment perspective, it's actually very attractive, I think, from an investor perspective. Even if these orphan diseases, and there's actually 2. There's SCA27B, which we've talked about. There's a similar condition that manifests similarly called episodic ataxia type 2, with excellent proof of concept data using our drug, which roughly doubles our market size. And the economics and the business really line up nicely in a way that isn't often the case. So it's a far less expensive and less risky path to a pharma outcome.
Thank you for identifying the primary differences and advantages working with Solaxa and getting this new drug to the market. And one last thing before we sort of wrap up the podcast is a lot of people have heard about the JP Morgan conference, which is one of the largest gatherings in the world of companies in the life science industry and investors and strategic partners coming together. But also it's been characterized as really a zoo, trying to get everything accomplished in a very short period of time. I mean, it's generally raining out there this time of the year.
Great. And I've been there as part of the delegation of a public company. We won't be going there. Startup companies don't go there. You never step foot inside. There are these corollary events at the 6 or 10 other hotels in the immediate vicinity of Union Square, focusing on startup or mid-stage, et cetera. And then most investors have suites of their own where they draw people in. So it's like everybody converges on San Francisco, but they're going to multiple places, multiple meetings. As to the rain, yes, absolutely. I've sacrificed more than one pair of shoes walking from one hotel to the next to hit my meetings. And by the end of the week, it's like, yeah, it's not even worth flying back to Washington with this pair of shoes. So that is what it is. But it's all about having, A, focus on what you're there for, and B, being opportunistic, because the cocktail hours and the dinners and you never know who you're going to meet with. And so you have to be ready to do your elevator pitch literally in an elevator.
I think that's important. Jen, anything you want to add to that?
Lewis did a great job. Just actually for a lot of folks who are new to JP Morgan, that JP Morgan is really it's everything around JP Morgan. And I think the distinction that I think is really important for folks who don't know it's JP Morgan. So Lewis did a great job explaining that it's very few people actually sometimes walk into the West End and will be presenting. It really is everything around there. And I think just an incredible amount of, there's so many of people's vendors, so many of the law firms. There's actually a really good opportunity to really leverage your whole ecosystem. A lot of startups, as Lewis kind of kicked off and said, there are lots of companies locally here that will help network. There's just an endless ability. You just got to get out there. You got to put just dozens and dozens and hundreds of shots on goal to really hustle your way at JP Morgan.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess the key is we're going to have an open mic here. Is there anything, Christian, Lewis, or Jen, that we didn't cover that you would like the listeners know about Solaxa? And we've been talking to Christian Walker, who's the founder and CEO of Solaxa, Lewis Gutierrez, who's the COO of Solaxa, and Jen Butler, the Chief Commercial Officer of Solaxa. Anything that you would like the listeners to have as a final takeaway on this podcast?
Well, thanks, Rich, again for the introduction, the ability to talk about Solaxa. And we're most proud about is the fact that we're a different kind of startup company. We've organized as a public benefit corporation. Our goal is to develop neurotherapeutics that are both impactful and accessible. While we do put return on investment as a high priority, we also put patients' lives and the impact that we can have on those people's lives as a really critical part of what we do. We want to do good in this world, and we want to make sure that that good is felt by the people who are taking our drugs. And we look forward to having a significant return on investment for our investors. And it's really creating that balance. And Solaxa is a unique combination. As both Jen and Lewis have added, we've brought together a rare population. We're taking a repurposing play. We have human data in a small group of people, and we're going into a phase 3 trial. And those are very unique characteristics to say for a seed stage company. And the benefit that Solaxa has gotten from being in Montgomery County and from all of the support has only made us more successful. And we look forward to building on that success and in building a profitable company here in Maryland.
The last thing I'm going to close with is if anybody has an interest in learning more or would like to contact Solaxa or even set up a meeting with you out at the JP Morgan conference, how would they get in touch with you?
I'll go ahead and give my email address. It's Luis, Luis, at Solaxa.com, Solaxa.com. We're available through the Bio one-on-one partnering, as well as I am through Biotech Showcase, as well as the CSSI partnering event. So we're on 3 of the platforms, and virtual meetings are great too. We don't have to be at JP Morgan, but certainly if they are face-to-face, that's actually always the best way to first meet a person. And we'll eagerly take your meetings.
Great. Thank you. Well, you're all on an exciting journey. We wish you the best of luck, whether it's at JP Morgan or years into the future. And we know that you're going to be a successful company in the BioHealth Capital Region. So thank you for being on BioTalk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.